Well, welcome everyone. Today we are talking about white papers. So for those of you who've never heard about a white paper, think of a report, think of a long form document. And when I say long form, I mean 2,500 to 3,000 words or so. Now, white papers are typically used in the business to business space where a company's product or solution is complex. It takes a lot to explain what it does, and it can't be explained in a catchy soundbite. So in today's episode, we're going to explain white papers, cover some of the pitfalls along the road to creating a white paper, and walk you through a way to tell if your company would benefit from creating a white paper. And by the end of this podcast, you'll know if this is the type of content for you, and if so, how to get started with one. Now, I'm joined today by Ken, Ian, and Paul, and we're going to dive into white papers.
All right.
So the first question I've got for you, Ken, what is a white paper?
So when I think of a white paper, I think of something that's more technical, needs to be researched more, probably has more stakeholders who are going to look at it, because it's really going to be focused on explaining, identifying a problem and explaining a solution for that problem. So it needs to be well researched. And it needs to speak to multiple stakeholders, and so it's a lot more complex than just writing a blog post or even writing a little ebook. Ebooks can largely just be derivatives or of a couple of different blog posts or expansions of a blog post, for example. This is not that. The lineage of a white paper really comes more from a technical perspective. So think science or engineering, where they actually would write very technical stuff, that's well founded with research to support, describing the problem, documenting the problem thoroughly, and then really peer reviewing the results that came out of the findings. Pharmaceutical companies very much the same way when they're talking about some of the solutions that they're coming up with. Governments historically have also used these pretty heavily to talk about policy initiatives, or any social consequence. And so having a political science background as an undergraduate, I kind of was actually, my master's degree was more political science. When you look at social outcomes, there's a lot of study, there's a lot of research. You have to try to quantify benefits of like social programs or policy initiatives to the best that you can. And so, there's a lot of work that's been spent doing that. So, now when we're moving into the marketing world, this is going to be really relevant for businesses that I think have more technical needs, software companies, anybody who has a complex sale, I think is going to be well suited by considering doing a white paper. And again, I think what you want to do is you want to use the white paper to really present the problem, back up the problem to show that it's a real problem, and then provide your solution to the problem, and do that in a way that isn't overly salesy, but does demonstrate your authority and your expertise on having a great way to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Absolutely. Ian, what kind of companies should use white papers?
Yeah, before I answer that, because I love throwing curves into these questions. I actually enjoy the meaning of words, like the etymology of words. So I looked it up. So I have to share this because,
Okay.
So the term white paper originated when government papers were coded by color to indicate the distribution of them. So with white designated for public access. Thus, white papers are used in politics and business, as well as in technical fields to educate readers and help people make decisions. So I thought that was a cool.
Wow. So it's not just a made up term. I mean, it actually has, well, I guess it's a made up term. Every term's made up, but ultimately, okay, cool. That's neat to know.
It's neat to know. And you know what? It's neat to know too, that it even today, it sort of sticks to the original point, educational
Yeah.
for public use.
Yeah.
And yeah,
To
one of the
make
things I wanted to
decisions,
jump in on Ken, just before I get you going, Ian, is that that a very good white paper, even though you know it's written by a certain company, and of course they sell the product or solution that will help with the problem that they're talking about, it is a document that largely you could read it and feel like you were getting very, very well educated on,
Right.
you know, on this this problem.
Yeah.
It's not a thinly disguised sales pitch whatsoever. And even for your readership, the type of person that's going to download a white paper to aid in their buying or their research of a product or service is, you know, has a pretty high bar to what they expect when they're handing over their information for a white paper. Like, you better be delivering some good information here. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's got to be massive value. It
Yeah.
can't be, it can't come across as salesy at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, you can work that in a little bit, but you have to be really careful. It's really all about you. What you want to do with a white paper is you want to use it as an authority builder, that you understand the problem and you understand what it takes to solve the problem and have a solution to the problem.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, Ian, how about your turn?
All right. So the question that you asked me was, what kind of companies should use white papers?
Yeah.
So white papers are almost solely used in the business to business world, or in some of the other areas you heard, you know, obviously medical and technical and government and that kind of stuff, and educational. But since we're talking about and to business owners, it really is a business to business type tool. Like, you wouldn't use this to really educate consumers, because there's other tools that you could use for that are a little bit lighter. This is very technical. So the you know, the reason for this subject matter, as Ken was talking about, is usually very technical. It's meant to educate, inform, and influence them, subtly influence them. I mean, even by you asking the question, delivering an educational technical response, you're positioning yourself as an authoritative figure, and you're answering their question, which means you understand their problem. So, you know, you might be a prime candidate to use white papers in your business if you sell products or services that have a long sales cycle with multiple decision makers, and usually with significant budgets. You know, because you're trying to educate people, and really inform them of what the you know, the best solution is to the challenge, the technical solution. So companies that tend to use white papers are those with products or solutions that are highly technical, scientific, complex solutions, or those that rely on a high level of intellectual property even. So some examples. I think examples bring it rubber meets the road kind of stuff here. So even like a financial investment company could create a white paper to explain how artificial intelligence with expert managers over it work together to yield higher returns for their clients. A small handmade soap company, which seems ridiculous to have a white paper, right? Like, you think, why do those guys need a white paper? But they're trying to convince large distributors and large companies to carry their product. So they might want to explain their full production process, how it supports sustainability, eco-conservation, how they use locals in the impoverished parts of the world, and supportive data of why that matters to consumers. So that could be a very strong white paper. And again, they don't necessarily need to frame it in a, like, this is all about us, but this is a problem in the world. This is consumers want this solution, and this is why it's important. Even a small CRM training company could create a white paper that explains how the use of CRMs, when combined with comprehensive training programs, raises team effectiveness and customer satisfaction. So, I mean, there's lots and lots of uses for white papers. And those are just a few examples that came to my mind. If you guys have other examples, jump in.
Yeah. So Ian, with the soap company that you talked about, so it sounds to me like what their white paper is trying to do is really educate a distribution channel because that's their golden geese referral source. That is their strongest marketing channel potentially and sales channel. And so they need to educate them on why their product is valuable to that distributor's potential customers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, so a white paper is really to equip the decision maker to make the right decision, which is to choose you, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about, how do you help them through that? It's what we talk a lot about from a strategic standpoint is that marketing hourglass. And usually white papers tend to fit, higher up in the funnel where people are coming through. They need to know you, like you, trust you. So it actually covers a bunch of those. But it really is like, how do we equip these, often large decision makers to, first of all, see the benefit to their business, but see the benefit. So that's your audience, but you also have to put it into perspective for their audience. Like, why is it important to them and their own audience or customer base, so that, you can help frame the story for them.
Yeah.
Cool. I think it's really neat what you picked up on as well. It's not necessarily just a complex product or solution that you have to have, because I'm imagining some people listening going, well, we don't build anything that can go to the moon. Why do we need a white paper? But your last example with the CRM, so it's not about the CRM. It's not how we enter information better. It was how that plus training equals something else. So, that's a complex problem, and that's a complex solution that you're going to need, a few words, if you will, to, explain the problem and explain how all these different elements come into play to help your business that people may have not thought of before.
Yeah, and with regards to that specific example, the pain point that the CRM company actually exists for is the pain point of companies that invest in CRMs and either behaviorally people aren't using it properly, or there's a host of issues involved where you're not maximizing or leveraging that technology in order to truly serve your customers. And it's also beneficial to your team because that there are internal aspects of CRM, and management also has a particular view of their own team, of how they're interacting with customers, where it can be a super powerful tool. So really in that white paper, you're really trying to kind of take the Band-Aid off, or even just show like, this is a common problem, but there is a solution, right? And this is why it's important to go down this path and educate them and help them understand that, because otherwise a lot of companies invest in these tools and they're just they think something's wrong, and so they jump to another tool and another tool and another tool.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So you tell me there's no silver bullet? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm telling you, we're all people, and people are there should be a white paper on people because we're complex systems and individuals. So
isn't that the truth? I don't know if that white paper would ever be finished. My goodness. Now, Paul, we've alluded to the fact of, a white paper is not an ebook and not a thinly disguised, sales pitch. So could you spell out a few examples of what a white paper is not?
Well, yeah, like you said, it's not an ebook. It's not a blog post. It's definitely not product focused. It should be topic or idea focused. And it's not like, it's very detailed. It's not a high level, half-ass researched piece of work. It's very well researched and it's very detailed. And, some people will say that it should be easy to read, and you can do that to a point, I guess, but these things tend to be technical. So they may not necessarily be easy to read, but it can't be overly complex either. It can't be filled with a bunch of technical terms that most people aren't going to understand, because your target audience probably doesn't understand those technical terms. That's what you're trying to explain to them. And it's also not a bottom of the funnel kind of thing. It's not a late stage. This is going from step one, like you said, like Ian said, with the soap company and the distribution channels. This is why you should consider carrying our product or promoting our service, whatever it is. So it's not a late stage kind of thing. and keep in mind that it's used by buyers for research and information gathering, so they have to be able to understand it. That goes back to it not being overly technical, but sometimes it's kind of difficult to not get technical in them.
Great, great. Now, with this talk about white papers and how much research is involved, when we in our company, when we do white paper projects, we tell them they need to plan for about 12 to 14 weeks from yes, we're doing a white paper till the day they see it published on the website. Upon saying that, a lot of people think, "Oh my God, that's so like that's too long." But once somebody can be walked through and see how much is involved, they can see how it could take so long, which actually isn't so long for all the complexities involved in it. So, Ken, could you walk through some of the steps that would be involved to get a white paper up and running and then finally published?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sadly, there are a lot of organizations, businesses, whatnot, that really don't have great brand standards. So if they did, they've already got a little bit of a leg up because they may already have an eye for some of the design elements that need to come in. But with a white paper, I mean, it's a little misleading in its title because you think, okay, it's just going to be this long white Word document kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you could do that, but you really shouldn't. You should take the time to really design and lay it out just like you would any other marketing material, because it's going to speak volumes about it. Your business and your brand. So the other thing about, when you get started, there are a lot of stakeholders usually involved in creating the white paper for a business to talk about that problem and to talk about the solution. And so you need to get those stakeholders all involved, the subject matter experts, whatever you want to call them, and if you're going to provide any financial data, you're going to have to talk to the CFO. If you're going to provide any technical data, you're going to have to talk to your technology officer, your information officers, whoever those folks might be, maybe operations. So you really want to get, a lot of people pulled together to really do this thoroughly. It's not an editorial either, so it's not like a blog post where it's like, I'm going to tell you the 5 best things that I think you should go do to get found on social
Google.
media or something,
Yeah.
So it's not that. You need to research it. You need to outline it. And because there are so many different stakeholders, and they all view the world with different set of lenses, and rightfully so, you're going to have plan for a lot of iterations of review and approval cycles. So I would plan on having to have this go through at least 3 to 4 revisions, from outline to first draft, second draft, reviewing hopefully the final draft. And that's just to get the content down. Now you need to turn it over to your design team to lay it out and make it look good. So I think you can get a good running start on the design aspect, and maybe you can start working on that in parallel with the content creation to a certain degree, because hopefully you do have brand standards. So the colors that you want to use, maybe the types of call outs that you want to use to highlight the critical points, to really emphasize those things. But again, because it's writing, it's basically like writing a book in a lot of ways. And you have to annotate, the sources, to show where you're getting your data to back up your arguments and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a beast, and it's because there are a lot of moving pieces, all coming from different people with different perspectives to really provide that big picture overall view of that problem and the solution.
So we can see how it would take a long time to get this going, and it seems like, as you explain it, 14 weeks. It seems pretty reasonable after you explain it like that. So Ian, if people haven't been scared away about the 14 weeks, are there any pitfalls they could face along the road to from starting to finishing their white paper?
The only thing to fear is fear itself. Do not be scared of 14-week turnaround time. I think one of the biggest potential pitfalls is having no strategic alignment. You've heard us talk a lot about strategy first, strategy first, strategy first. That's because that's become a really important banner for us to carry. And it's very unique in the industry because people easily forget about strategy. So strategic alignment. So what I mean by that is you need to ensure that your white paper has a clear business purpose. It's just not an altruistic, let's educate the world. No, you need a business purpose to this that supports your sales, your marketing, your business objectives. So even though you may not be doing overt selling in it, the purpose has to fit within that marketing hourglass. Like you understand where it fits, you understand what precedes it, you understand what comes after it. You would definitely, even though they might not be overt calls to actions, you still have calls to actions in this. Like, hey, want to learn more about our, what you just read about, call us up, go to our website. And so just like every marketing effort, we speak about strategy has to come first, or you're just burning time and energy and money. The second one I would say from my perspective, that's kind of the second biggest pitfall is you need to remember who your audience is, what question they're trying to answer, what question they're asking in their decision-making process, and how this particular white paper can help support that decision. So stay on topic, don't get sidetracked. So really that pitfall, if you were to give it a title, it would be lack of focus. Don't lose focus of what this white paper is all about. Be relevant, stay relevant, and remember it's all about bringing value to your reader. It's not about, hey, we kicked out another white paper as a company. Woo! No, it's about being relevant and adding value to your readers.
Good. That's great. That's great.
I've got another one that I think is a huge problem, and that's version control. You have so many people looking at this, and if you're the person who's tasked to integrate all of the comments, they are going to contradict. So how do you adjudicate that? What's your process? How do you even keep track of all of the different comments? Are you even working on the right version? Did the people who reviewed it, are they even reviewing the right version? So you really need to plan this out, and you need to use a tool set that's going to make the version control and the coordination of comments and integration of comments as easy as possible.
That's a really good point. And not only technically, but if Bob says something and Lisa says something else, who do we go with?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Who do we choose? Right.
You need to know who has ultimate veto control in that corporate culture, or company culture.
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. Paul, is there any other pitfalls that you've come across or about with white papers?
Yes, a couple that come to mind are just because of the length and complexity, there's going to be delays and missed deadlines, and there's just so many opportunities for something to, throw the proverbial wrench into the works and screw things up. And so really it comes down, and I guess this is a separate one, but they kind of go together, is someone has to own this project because you're going to have all these inputs from all these different people. And ultimately you're going to wind up with review by committee, which is never going to work. So everyone has to have their defined roles, but ultimately, and I think this is kind of what Ken was alluding to, someone has to own this project. Someone has to make the final decision, say, okay, this doesn't belong here. And that's going to piss certain people off because, sometimes egos get involved, but that someone has to have ownership to make that decision. And if that's not there, you run the risk of it. You wind up never getting it published, and then your competitor gets their white paper published before you, and now you've just lost an opportunity. I think those are two challenges or pitfalls that kind of go together that need to be kept in mind and addressed from the beginning before you even start. Who owns this project? Who has input? Because, you have graphic designers involved. A lot of people never think, why would you need a graphic designer on a white paper? Well, because there's graphics involved. There's probably going to be graphics involved.
Should be.
And, your content writers, your technical writers, all these people that are going to have input. Like Ken said, they're all going to have different perspectives and different inputs. So someone has to have ownership and final decision making. And I think that needs to be set out at the very beginning.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is you've got to have buy-in and commitment from all parties who are going to be involved. So you need to get that down and agreed upon by everybody so that they're meeting their deadlines. Because, we see it, even in fairly simple things, people get busy or they get sick and they're out for a period of time. And, so how are you going to deal with that? You ideally you want to try to plan for this, whatever is, this oftentimes may be a marketing or a product development type of initiative, and that's the sponsor of this type of a project. Okay. But other parts of the organization don't have the same priorities and the same needs as you. So you'd have to negotiate this effort across the entire organization and get buy-in and commitment, or you're going to expect to see delays, and delays lead to spiraling out of control and maybe even never completing a project or creating a subpar project.
Absolutely. Now, Ken, you mentioned the word beast. What's this beast is because it is, as we explained it. It's a huge endeavor. It really is.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, a well-written, well-researched, well-done white paper, you're looking at a shelf life of 12 to 18 months, quite seriously. So, the 14 weeks we've seen is definitely worth it. But okay, let's pretend it's promotion time. It's published, goes up on the website 2 hours ago. Many people are going to think like, we're done, just download it, will ya? But much like a product launch or any kind of other launch, launch day is not the end of the process, it's the start of it, right? So what are some ways that a white paper can lend itself or be the basis of some promotion that happens for the company, both in order to, download the white paper, but also to, educate the prospective buyers of like, hey, we've got some answers here. We've got some content that will be very helpful to you.
Yeah. So I think the white paper really is great for thought leadership. And that's probably the initial reason why somebody came up with it, is we need to establish ourselves as being a thought leader, in our marketplace. The golden word here is repurposing. You've got a document that you can break up into chunks and use in so many different ways, or you can use it as the basis to create other very strongly related marketing products. So you could take your white paper and use it as the basis for a webinar. You could use it as the justification to get yourself booked on a podcast as a guest. You can take chunks and make them tweetables. You can, a real popular thing to do right now is to create a little carousel on Instagram, that just kind of tells a little piece of the story to pique people's interest, to say, okay, when you're talking about this, there are really 3 different dimensions. Boom, boom, boom. For more, download our white paper. That thing plays really, really, really well when it's done right and it's done consistently with branding, as an Instagram post. You could turn that into a little video and put it out there on LinkedIn, more likely LinkedIn than Facebook, but it could be on Facebook. You can take elements of this and use it to book media appearances, for people to talk about key talking points that you lay out in your book. You should create an executive overview to present to somebody who doesn't have time to read the full details of the document, but you need to summarize it and give that to the highest level executives to say, here, this is something that you need to make sure your folks are looking into and taking care of. So yeah, there are lots of different things. And the good news is, even though this is a multi-week project, it spawns a whole lot of marketing materials, training materials, asking, justification for investors, could be based on and include be drawn from a lot of these materials. So yeah, super, super powerful.
Great, great. Now, Ian, if a leader in their company is listening to this podcast and is thinking that a white paper might be a good idea for them, what are some questions that they can ask themselves to get clarity on if this is a good use of their time and budget? Because I mean, this I was going to say this could be seen as another shiny object, but it's just too painful to be considered a shiny object. But what are some things a company would have to consider? Because there are far easier and faster ways to promote your products or services. So what kind of things should they ask themselves if they're like, should we write a white paper?
Yeah. So the first question I think is so important. It's asking yourself, do we sell highly technical, highly innovative, or highly complex products or services? And would it influence or help buyers or support their decision-making process to have these complex solutions and issues explained, right? I think that's probably the really big key question. Because if you don't ask that, how do you know if it's strategically viable or relevant for your business? Other questions that I think are really helpful too is, do we have a new idea that needs an in-depth, comprehensive explanation, right? Especially like you see this all the time today in every industry that artificial intelligence is booming, right? Everything has artificial intelligence in it. So it's, but that's a good example of, well, that's great that AI is in my coffee maker, but actually how is that going to help me? So another question is, does our product or service or idea address a significant trend, a challenge, or a problem in the market? And then this dovetails really nice with what Ken was talking about. Are we able to promote the white paper continuously for months after it's published? And how it dovetails with Ken's question, or what he was responding to, was how can we repurpose it? Can we create a white paper video of an expert walking you through this? Because some people consume video more than written, right? Mm-hmm. Have we considered how this white paper can be refreshed in the future? Because you were talking about, maybe the freshness date, the best before date on it is 12 months, Jen. But, within 12 months, if the content is so foundational in the industry, chances are you can probably refresh it just by rewriting some areas, adding some new trends to it, whatever it is. But I think it's really important to get that on your marketing calendar so that as a team, you're going to invest in that because it's such a valuable thing. And then a great question too is how will we leverage this through our sales and marketing channels? And I think that's huge, right? Because as Ken was saying, are you going to tweet about it? What are you going to do with this? And this is a teaser. Jen and her team have created a white paper on white papers, and it's actually a fantastic document. But in there you have pitfalls, right? You have common pitfalls that you've seen happen in the white paper process. And I think, like, as an example, you could pull out those pitfalls as a mini video clip. You could pull them out as social shares, all with the purpose of driving people back to your white paper so it's consumed and gets more visibility.
Absolutely. We are hard at work on that. So we are drinking our own Kool-Aid. I swear to God. I know that's one thing I said. So Greg helped, we tag teamed on this, and we're both like, we have to do what we're preaching. So, so anyways, yes, it's in motion. It is in motion. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that wasn't like a poke the bear thing. That was I just thought it was such a great example when I saw it. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. And thank you for the little plug. I appreciate it so much. I do. Paul, so wanting to write a white paper and writing a white paper, there's a lot of W's in here, two different things. So if the company has gone through some of the questions that Ian posed and said, yeah, we have the, the burning problem that we need to explain. What are some of the things that a company should ask itself about, like, actually, can we get this thing written? Can we actually produce this white paper?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess basically your question boils down to, do we need help or can we do it ourselves to a large degree?
There we go.
And yes, you probably do. If you're a very large company, you may have a large pool of internal talent to draw from, and you could do this yourself. But just because you have a complex product, service, a long sales cycle, you don't necessarily have to be a large company to have that product or service, in which case you probably don't have the people internally to do it. Do you have the content writers, the technical writers, the graphic design, someone to take ownership of this and drive it, and the input from the different departments? You may not even have all those different departments, especially if you're a smaller company that outsources your marketing because you don't have that internally. You probably don't have the internal people to write a white paper. So in that case, you're definitely going to need external help, because white papers are addressing a technical issue, generally speaking, but you need a writer that can take that technical jargon and put it in an easy to understand language that the average person can understand. I guarantee you technical people cannot do that. I'm a technical person and I work on that, but I tend to, and has told me oftentimes to speak English because I do tend to do that. And if you are a software, if you write software, you are probably not going to be able to translate that into easy to understand language, because that's not your world. You need someone that can do that. Mm-hmm. So yes, you probably do need help. Like you said, wanting to have one and putting the time and effort into making it happen are two different things. Hey, I want to be a billionaire, but I'm probably not going to put in the time and effort it takes to get there. Okay, that's a very long uphill battle there.
So Donald Miller says, that people rarely buy the best solution. They buy the solution that's the clearest, that helps them understand and solve their problem to achieve an outcome that they want. And you look at the whole history of technology, there are superior products that never thrive and do well. Beta versus VHS, in the
that's exactly what I was going to say. VHS won the PR battle.
Yeah, and it's because probably because they didn't think about the marketing elements. One thing I didn't talk about when I was answering the question about, okay, now we've built this white paper, how do we promote it? Just because you write it doesn't mean they're going to come. They're not going to find it on your website. It's not like this giant SEO asset that's out there that's just going to be a magnet that just draws people. You've got to get it in front of the right people. So you need to think about, what are those channels that you can get in front of your ideal audience? Where are they spending time? Are they going to respond to a Google ad campaign? Do you need to try to get it in front of them on LinkedIn? Do you need to go old school and maybe send them, some direct mail, or hit them at a trade show? You've got to map out all of that kind of stuff. So the white paper itself is a pretty technical document, and I would treat it as an engineering project personally. But you still have to figure out smart ways that you can market it. And the other thing too is, I think it's really important to make sure that when you look at this document and you evaluate it, you have to think about the political implications. And I'm not talking about, right versus left or stuff like that. I'm talking about, are you saying something that's stepping on somebody's toes, that's going to create an enemy unnecessarily? It could be within your organization. It could be firing up the anger of a competitor. You need to think about that maybe you want to do that, maybe, but do it by design and intention. Don't do it inadvertently. So you really, when you're reviewing this document, it's not just about, is it right or wrong? I mean, you've got to think about the broader implications. Is this going to be something that's going to wake up the giant, and that giant can turn around and crush me?
Mm,
You know,
wow, good point.
yeah. So, but you also do want to look at, you know, unfortunately, we live in a world where there's always somebody who's willing to nitpick and post something about social media. So you always have to look at the overall sanitization and just make sure there's nothing unnecessarily that's going to bring down the ire of the internet on you.
On you.
And
Absolutely.
if I can just circle back to
Yeah.
what Paul was answering, it just rang true with me about, you know, one of the real benefits about having an external provider help you through this process is just like with how we've spoken about in the past, how when we're developing marketing strategies for people, we actually do third-party interviews with their customers, because we come at it from an entirely different perspective. We don't get caught up in the emotion, and so just like that, in this, I'm going to say process this time, just to mix people up with how I say process. I know Ken's in shock, but
What does
just
that
like
mean?
that, just like that. I think an external person or team that can ask questions in the way that the audience is asking questions, rather than, you know, all of us, especially highly technical people, have a particular view of their product, the technical aspects of it, and any of us who have that technical mindset get so caught up in that. As an example, you know, when people used to call me about SEO, I used to get sucked into I wanted to dazzle them with all my knowledge about the technical aspects of SEO, but that's not what they were asking. They were asking, how can it help my business? Right. And so in the same way, I think, you know, having a team come in that's capable of helping you write a white paper, ask the questions, interview the people that are providing the technical aspects, and then shape it in a way that's going to impact your audience. I think that is an understated powerhouse right there that you would be silly not to employ, even if you have an internal marketing team.
Absolutely. I have four things I want to cover and jump in on them. You know, as I talk about them. It's as you guys were talking, I wanted to share some of these. I guess they're battle scars that we've come through since doing white paper. So Greg and I, as a tag team, we've been doing these since 2016. And so some of the things that come up. So the first thing is sometimes you'll find that your first idea spawns 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that it could become, a massive encyclopedia if you're going to write it all in one white paper. And that's the wrong thing to do. So, I mean, the neat thing about having a third party, come to interview you and write this white paper for you is the fact that, they can help you clarify certain ideas. And as well, what we ended up doing in those kind of situations, it's just another white paper, because you just do not want to dilute your main point with like 16 other points. So that may come up. Be prepared for it and just put those other ideas on the back burner, or get another white paper going on that. That's the best thing to do. The time to write. Now, this is just one group here, but if this can give you any kind of idea, from the time that Greg gets the go-ahead for the first draft until the time the first draft is shown to me, because it's always shown to us internally before we hand it over, it's a solid 2 weeks. And what I mean by a solid 2 weeks is we use him on other client work, but for those 2 weeks, he's off. He's not doing anything but writing. He's now got a 2-day turnaround and responding to emails. Like, we're talking, he is locked in writing. So this does really take a substantial amount of focus if you're going to have someone write something really good for you. The third thing is about the graphics. We've had pushback on, we don't need no fancy graphics for, we have no graphs or charts or anything like that. Or the other pushback would be like our readers don't need that fluffy stuff. Well, with a well experienced graphic designer with typography, the way they use headings, the way they use blocks of color, the way they might pull out certain quotes, the way they lay out the information on the page, that can vastly improve the readability of your document, even if you don't have any charts or graphs to put on there. If your information is highly technical and you've got highly technical drawings, sometimes graphic designers touch on those can just make them pop a little more, just make them look a little more interesting. So just don't slough off the idea that your work does need some a graphic touch. And the last thing is about when we talk about multiple decision makers, you have to think, if you're thinking in the way of marketing helping sales happen, marketing help drive that potential customer through the funnel, you got to think about this white paper being a sales document that someone is downloading, and based on the information in this white paper, they can then take out, their own sound bites or the stuff that you have in quotes or page 2, and be able to take that into their own meeting and start to socialize the idea of, this is a great company, we should look at their products or services. So just be aware that the white paper it is not all about you, and it's got to be written in a way that it can help the internal team at your potential customer's place, enhance the ability for them to sell you into their own decision makers. So it's much more than that. And so that kind of leads itself to, well, our audience is highly technical, we don't have to write in, such a conversational way. Well, you might, because the end user who's on the committee to buy your software is not technical. They need to know, how's this going to be used in my day-to-day work, as opposed to, the technical IT department that has no problem with technical documentation. Yeah. So just be aware of all those things as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, because, white papers often can build champions within the organization that you're trying to sell into. So you need to make their job easy to help sell it internally. And if you don't have those graphical elements, those call outs, those easier, more digestible pieces of information, you're making their job a whole lot harder. And so you want to factor that stuff in for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're speaking to my heart, Jen, when you talk about introducing graphics that support the message. Because I originally started my career as a graphic designer, and so part of that was information graphics, right? How do you take complex issues, boil them down to very simple graphics that support the message people are reading about? Because just what Ken was talking about, right? If you confuse, you lose. If you make people work too hard, they'll give up. So remember that not everybody reading this is going to be an engineer. Not everybody reading this is going to be a scientist. You have to help them along. And just a simple anecdote from my corporate days when I was buying highly complex, marketing automation systems. Sometimes the people would come in, they'd walk you through a sales presentation. They'd drop down, here's our Bible on this solution. When in fact, as I'm going through this, or as they're explaining it, I'm actually drawing a flow chart on my page, because I'm trying to understand, okay, how does this process work within our business so that we can effectively use it? Now, wouldn't it have been nice if they actually provided a graphic of, this is how most businesses use this solution within their teams. This is where our team dovetails with your team, blah, 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 right? Like graphics can, even though, some people might see them as highly simplistic because they're not wired that way, a lot of people are visual learners, and in the very least, a simple graphic can help support the message. And I think that's such an important thing to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we remember images way more and for much longer than we do words.
And Ken, if you can introduce smell, I mean, woo, the memory is off the charts. So, exactly. Introduce some smell-o-vision into that white paper and you're rocking.
There you go.
Scratch and sniff. Here we go. Back to my sticker days. That's great. This looks like a great place to wrap up. So, folks, if you're interested in learning more about white papers for your business, we'll put a link in the show notes to a white paper about white papers that can walk you through all of what we talked about in depth.
I can't point.
And
I'm trying to point. No, I'm trying to
Where?
point to Jen. I'm not doing a good job. Never mind.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, you have to catch
Contact
this.
Jen is
I
where
thought he
We
was
have to catch
dancing
this
or like
funny
doing
thing
gang
on
symbols.
videos. I was like, what's happening there? If this has been helpful for you, please share the wealth with others by telling other people about this podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.